As you have maybe noticed, when I go on shoot and document the process to show you in a behind the scenes video, I enjoy analysing my photographs briefly to explain my opinion on the photo. Today, we are just going to leave the shooting part away and fully indulge in the analysis of one specific photo. It's going to go a bit too far and a little too much detail with points that might just be a bit too analytical and overall lead to an analysis becoming an over-analysis. I think this sounds like a fun idea, but some of it should probably be taken with a grain of salt because I really enjoy analysing photographs, and today I'm just going to take it a bit too far. If that is something that amuses you as well, then tag along. So, the photo I've chosen is this one here from my trip to Sardinia in summer. I chose this one because I once had an interesting conversation about this photo with a friend. We were looking through some photos from the trip and we ended up going into quite some detail with this photograph. What was interesting here is that our perception of the photo was quite different to begin with, which is why I've come to the assumption that by choosing this photo there is a higher chance that you might also perceive this photo differently, and if so, I'd love to read your perspective in the comments. So I got this photo on a walk through the street of the town we were visiting at the time. The town was quite similar to the other towns on Sardinia in multiple aspects. I guess the similarities are probably to be found all around Italy in general. I'm referring to the style of houses, the colour palettes, the various items you can spot in the front areas of the houses, and white chairs everywhere. Something I shot quite often on this trip is exactly that, the front of a building, usually either the entrance or the patio. What pulled me to these subjects was the impression they left. Thanks to all the items that are often scattered in these areas, these places are an effective way of photographing the country and indirectly the people. The items act as a piece of identification and a representation of the owners. If you're Italian, I would hope that you can recognize quite quickly in the photographs that these were taken somewhere in Italy. It's the details that give it away, I think. The front area of these places were never empty. They always had many things standing or lying around, some were even completely packed with stuff. Others were more decorative and some quite functional. What makes the choice of this photograph all the more interesting in my opinion is that I initially did not like it as much as many other photos of the same type. This one didn't feel as conclusive as the others, and it didn't have the same flow that I could feel when looking at photos like this one. I immediately fell in love with this photo because I felt so pulled in by it. The composition seems to have a spiral effect. This photo, however, didn't have that. It was then later, when I was chatting with my friend about this photo, which he seemed to see so much more in than I did, that I decided to not just dismiss it as a worse photo in comparison to the others, and instead find the beauty in this photo that's just hidden. So let's begin on the surface with the composition. I think we can agree that the main focus here is set on the stack of chairs. The rest of the composition can be separated into 2 primary subjects and 7 secondary subjects. Apart from that, this composition is built with many lines. These are the most important ones, I believe. And then one last important structure in this composition is, of course, the tree that arches over the top and adds a frame to the left side of the photo. So I think the first aspect of this composition, which initially didn't feel quite right to me, was the leading lines. They led my eyes past the stack of chairs into the corner of the entrance, which however didn't turn out to show anything interesting, hence there was no payoff. Only then did my eyes revert to the chairs and identify them as the protagonist of the story told in this photograph. So at first the composition pulled me in, but then I got rejected and continued to look for a compositional structure and elements. It's right about here, I think, that tonal values and colour become relevant for the further course of the eyes. I think it's pretty safe to argue that the chairs are the brightest object in the photo thanks to their white plastic material. So naturally, the eyes gravitate towards the chairs and recognize that this is actually where the subject is. However, then a second and third character are introduced. On the left, we can spot 2 bins. Thanks to the vibrant yellow color of the right bin, this subject can attract some attention rather easily. What places this subject below the chair is simply the position, I think, because our eyes rarely begin to examine a photograph from the corner. The other subject I'm referring to are the 2 chairs and the table on the right side of the photo. I suppose these 3 subjects have some weight in the photo simply due to their size and the amount of space they take up in the frame. Now, when speaking of the larger scale compositional elements in this photograph, there's one more structure I would like to point out, which is of key relevance for the story that is told in the photograph. The scene shown here is separated in 2 areas by 2 frames and 1 border. The tree and everything underneath are the left area of the photo. The walls on the right that frame the 2 white chairs, the table, and the entrance to the house are the right area of the photograph. These 2 areas are separated along this line. This separation is mainly accentuated by firstly the wall that creates a clear line with its edge, and secondly the line on the ground that marks a change of material. A key feature that makes this separation possible are the 2 carpets and the way they are positioned. They clearly emphasize the line by having it go right through them, and they even go further by being split on one side as if the line were disrupting their connection. I say that the carpets are such an important part of the separation in the composition because if there was only one carpet and it would lay on top of the line, it would act more like a bridge between the sides, less like an emphasis of the line, as it is now. However, in this unique case, the carpets are even being split by the line, so this just stresses the clear separation of the 2 areas in the composition. Now, why is this relevant? I've pointed out many details of the composition so far, which allow us to see the structure of the photograph and the relationships between the various elements. However, what does this all lead to? What's the point? This is when we get into the story of this photo. Something you have surely heard often enough is that the story told in a photograph is crucial. However, most of the time I assume that we shoot photos that don't include a story because it's no easy task. The difficulty doesn't solely lie within creating or capturing a story, but also reading the story. This is especially true, I think, when viewing other photographers' work, because usually we don't know what the artist's intention was, and so we either see a story unfold or decide that the photograph doesn't tell a story. An alternative, though, is to find or create a story. And that is precisely the case in this photo, at least for me. At first, I didn't pay enough attention to the photo, but even after my friend pointed out his liking for this photograph, I still couldn't grasp his perspective. But after exchanging thoughts, I kind of saw what he saw. I wouldn't go as far as stating that I fully understood what he saw at that time, but I did partially. And so since then, my interpretation of this photo has grown into quite some detail that is largely based on the first push my friend gave me in that conversation. One comment he had which struck me and puzzled me for a while was that he felt this photograph is sad. That chat was a little while ago, so during the creation of this analysis, I asked him to look at it once more and summarize his key points in a couple sentences so that I can show you 2 different perspectives on this photo. From his point of view, the photograph conveys a feeling of isolation. He sees a separation in layers from foreground to background, with the foreground being the most relevant. The items scattered in the scenes here seem to come to life and interact with each other, which creates a feeling of surrealism. Now, this revision of his thoughts is a bit different, I believe, to what he initially saw when we were breaking down the photo for the first time. However, the core aspects remain. My perspective was largely influenced by the sadness that he had pointed out, and it turns out that our interpretations have some key similarities. So let's continue with the story I see told here. When breaking down the composition, I showed you that this photograph has 1 main subject, 2 primary subjects, and 7 secondary subjects. Now, imagine all of these subjects are a character in this photo. They have a personality. You can think of it a bit like in the 1991 animated film of The Beauty and the Beast, in which, if I remember the film correctly, there were various pieces of furniture that came to life and had their own unique personality. Similarly, if you look at this photo from that perspective, the scene here is the sad story of the stack of chairs being thrown away. Previously, I pointed out the border that separates the left and the right side of the photo. The right side is beneath a roof, the floor has tiles, there's a light that blesses that side with some light in the dark nights, and most importantly, this is the side of the entrance to the people who live here. The furniture's purpose is to be of use to the people who live here and use them. The furniture is cherished and taken care of, well, until they get old and the people decide to replace them. The left corner of the photo shows us the bins where things such as wrapping paper, empty bottles, or used tissues are stored for a couple days before being ultimately thrown out and brought together with everyone else who isn't welcome in the people's households anymore. The distance from the border to the left edge of the photo represents the path from the first exclusion from the household to the last time the rubbish gets to see their home before being thrown out and brought to an unknown place of despair. Some items don't immediately land in the bins before being dumped, but instead get to slowly grind their way from the border to the bins. And that is where our protagonist, the stack of chairs, currently is. We don't know the backstory of the chairs, but I imagine they used to be a popular piece of furniture. In the last couple summers, the family would enjoy sitting in them in their backyard where they'd enjoy a barbecue or play card games on a table. But one day, one of the chairs got a crack in one of its legs, and as one of the family members sat down in it, the chair broke, and the person sitting fell to the floor. In anger about the weakness of that chair, the family decided to throw it straight into the bin and get rid of it. The other chairs were then stacked and put in front of the house on standby. Maybe the family will need them again sometime this summer, but for now, the chairs have been replaced. The family decided that if the chairs don't get used anymore until winter, they would get rid of these too when the cold months arrive. And so the chairs just stand in front of the house, without a roof to keep the rain and the leaves off of them, or a light to brighten the dark night. They just stand there and await their disposal. In sight's reach, they envy the two white chairs on the table that are still appreciated by the family and used often. But simultaneously, they feel sorry for the one white chair that was already thrown out and is now somewhere out there, all alone. Hence, they feel the need to get out as well, to find the lonely chair and reunite. To the right of the chairs are two items that are scared too of being thrown out soon. They've already been placed outside the border. There might still be a slight chance that the family decides to bring them back in, but being on this side of the border, chances are they're going to stay on this side. And once they reach the distance that the chairs have reached, it is certain that they will not be needed anymore. To the left of the chairs, above the bins, is a flower. Everyone likes to call the flower the farewell flower. It's the last thing you pass before landing at the bins and get thrown out. When passing it, it whispers to you. If you listen carefully, you'll hear its sweet encouragement. It assures you that you'll be fine and that you won't be as bad off as you imagine. It's a bit of hope to warm the soul and briefly forget the worries about what lies ahead. And so, the chairs wait and wait, slowly coming closer to the flower, and we as the viewer watching this slow advancing separation are saddened by the chair's destiny. So that is the story that I could see unfold in this photograph. It's not something I saw immediately. As mentioned, it was my friend who pointed out the melancholy of the scene and the sadness that can be seen in the stack of chairs. And of course, this was in no way my intention when taking the photo. I think, however, this analysis shows that even when this was not the intention, and even if the photograph might seem boring at first, if you look carefully and add some personal imagination to your observation, you might find something interesting. If you made it this far into this analysis that turned into a story time about a picture of some chairs, I really hope you enjoyed this. I can imagine that some people think this is nonsensical, but I don't. I think it was fun, and I guess that's reason enough to overanalyze a photograph. So if you did enjoy, I'd appreciate a like, consider subscribing if you haven't yet, and I'll see you again next week in the next video. Until then, goodbye.